Real quick, if you have a story to tell, please reach out via email at contact@campfirecultpod.com or leave me a voicemail message at 720-297-8608. Also, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at campfirecultpod for free. It'll really help us reach listeners just like you. If you want to become a Patreon cult member to get extended episodes and other full Patreon-only episodes, you can sign up at patreon.com/campfirecultpod for only $5 a month. And finally, if you don't mind, please share, rate, and review wherever possible. Welcome, dear listener, to the Campfire Cult Podcast. From a camper van deep in the haunted woods, I bring you first-hand accounts of chilling encounters with the paranormal. Step into the night and take a peek into the realm where reality and the supernatural collide. My name is Jazz, and I'll be your host. Welcome back, campers. When the sun dips below the horizon and the forest fades into shadow, something else awakens, something ancient, something hungry. Tonight, we're diving headfirst into the whispers and legends that haunt the edges of the map, the creatures that watch from the tree line, the ones that mimic voices, scream in the woods, and stalk you through the night from the dark places. This episode is a guided tour through the nightmares that live just beyond the firelight. So grab a blanket, stoke the fire, and don't look too hard into the dark. Because tonight, we're not alone, and something is looking back at us. Let's begin. Up first, while away at summer camp, a young girl hears her mom's voice calling from deep in the woods.
I was 15 at the time of my encounter and was definitely not a believer in anything supernatural, paranormal, or anything of the sort. It happened while I was at a local summer camp. There was absolutely nothing special about that day. No weird lights, people, animals, sounds, nothing. It was just the same camp schedule as I'd grown used to in the past 2 weeks I'd been there. My age group had just finished lunch and was able to persuade our counselor to let us play a game called Scatter down by the lake. It's like a giant hide-and-seek in the woods. Now, we had played this at least 20 times before that day, and nothing weird had happened to any of us. We all grew up playing in the woods, so it's not like we had an aversion or fear of it. But for some reason, that day when our counselor shouted, "Scatter!" and I ran to find a hiding place, it became a whole new ballgame. I had run as far as I could while still being able to see the lake, as were the rules, and had found a huge, old, uprooted tree that I decided would be the perfect hiding place. So I laid down as close as I could against the ground and waited. I had been there for about 5 minutes when I suddenly heard a voice calling my name in a weird, dreamy-like voice.
Come here.
And not just any voice. My mom's. Now, me and my mom are extremely close, thick as thieves, so I'd know her voice anywhere. I would swear on my own grave that it was, without a doubt, hers. But I knew it couldn't be her. She was 20 miles away at work. Even if it had actually been her and she'd come to pick me up early, the voice wasn't coming from the lake. It was coming from further out in the woods beyond the border of the camp. I knew I should have run away from this strange mimic mom voice, but I couldn't. It was almost hypnotic. It messed with my thoughts and gave me doubts like, well, it could be mom. Or, what if she's hurt? And, I have to get to her. All these things were flooding into my mind like someone had broken a dam I didn't know was there. They finally overwhelmed me, and emotions got the better of me. I took off running in the direction the voice was coming from. I ran as far as I could with only this strange voice as my guide.
Jessica, come
I couldn't
here.
have run for more than 5 or 7 minutes when I got to a clearing and the voice suddenly stopped. When I entered the clearing and didn't hear my mom's voice calling me anymore, I could finally think clearly again. Little alarm bells started going off inside my head saying, "You idiot," or "That's not mom," and run. But I couldn't run. I didn't know where to run. I had gotten so far away I had lost sight of the lake by camp and had absolutely no idea where I was. I was completely exhausted to boot. With no other options than to sit and catch my breath, I did just that. No sooner had I sat down, more warning bells went off in my mind. I quickly did a 360-degree survey around the clearing and noticed a strange noise. It wasn't the continuation of the voice before. No, it was the distinct sound of chattering teeth, like if you were cold. Only there was no one else around, and it was the middle of June in North Carolina. There's no way someone could be cold. And that's when I heard it, leaves and sticks crunching on the edge of the small clearing. I realized something was watching me. Then, whatever it was moved. Fast. It circled around the clearing almost like it was stalking prey. It was at that moment I knew. Whatever it was had led me out there, away from the rest of my group. Exactly like the predator my instincts had been screaming at me that it was. Without any other option other than to try and escape, I took off in the direction I thought I came from and sprinted as fast as I could. All the while, I heard the chittering of teeth and sticks crunching behind me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't dare turn around to see what was chasing me. I knew that if I did, I would slow down, and I absolutely could not. It felt like a lifetime running away from this thing before I finally saw the lake. Even though I didn't think I could, I ran faster than I ever have in my life. When I broke the tree line and ran to the lake where I knew my friends were, I finally felt safe enough to stop. I turned to look back and see just what had been chasing me. But when I did, I only saw a fleeting form running back the way I had come. The distinct sound of chittering teeth followed. When I finally found my counselor, who was the seeker to find all of us, I was hysterical with fear and hugged her as tight as I could. When I finally calmed down, she tried to get me to tell her what happened. I just asked, "Were you calling my name?" Before she even said anything, I already knew the answer. After all, it had been my mom's voice that led me away from everyone else. But what she said in reply was so much more bone-chilling to me. She told me, "No one called for you and we didn't know you were even gone. Everyone is still hiding and the game isn't even over yet. Who could have been calling for me?"
Up next, something tall, lanky, and evil lurked in the darkness.
This is still hard for me to wrap my head around because it shook me to my core, but this story takes place just over a year ago in late November 2018. I live in a rural suburb in southeastern Wisconsin, near a line of woods and ponds. My town is small and everything is silent and dark by 9 p.m. I tend to walk my dog after dinner and before bed, and my town is pretty safe, so walking her in the dark never fazed me. Until this. I live in an apartment complex that is on the end of a residential street, so most of the street is older houses. One night I was walking my dog, around 10:30 p.m. I think, when I saw something on the front lawn of one of these houses. They didn't have a light on their front porch, so most of their lawn was dark. But with lights from the surrounding houses, I could see a figure standing in the middle of their lawn. It was very tall and skinny, almost as tall as the roof of their ranch house, because even standing in the middle of the front yard, it looked almost as tall as the house. It was standing on its hind legs but had antlers or some type of tall ears like a bunny, and its arms and legs were abnormally long and stretched to the bone. The moment I saw it, my body froze, and I had that feeling that you only get when you're near immediate danger or evil. For context, I love the supernatural, paranormal, and true crime. I've lived in a without a doubt haunted house, frequently go on after-hours explorations of known haunted places, and have seen and experienced many paranormal events. That feeling is undeniable once you are familiar with it. So this tall, lanky creature is standing there, and I can't see its face, but by its positioning, I know it has noticed me also. My dog, who is normally aware of every living creature from a mile away in a snowstorm, is completely unaware of its presence. It felt like longer, but it was only a few seconds before this creature jumped straight up in the air, and I mean straight up, not forward, and bounded to the back of the house in 3 large strides. It didn't make a sound, and the way it jumped and moved was unlike any animal I've ever seen. The closest I would akin it to would be a deer, but it was on its hind legs and had the body features of a stretched-out human, but with antlers or tall ears. I felt stuck and almost hypnotized by the whole thing, but came to my senses enough to call attention to my dog and turn around to head for home. Behind all of the houses on this side of the street is woods, and some of the trees wrap around between this house and the neighboring house coming back towards home. We turned around, my eyes glued to the trees, and when we got to the middle of the houses, I could see two eyes watching me through the two houses. The presence and overall weight of the feeling this whole encounter gave me still sticks with me as clearly as the night it happened. I can remember it all so vividly and still feel the weight. Ever since that night, I've been thinking about it and running through all of the possibilities of what it could be, but always coming up with no explanation. It wasn't until about a month ago that I was watching a special on supernatural encounters that I heard about Wendigos. The description fit perfectly and made my blood run even colder. I'm fully convinced that what I saw that night had to have been a Wendigo. I've made a point to only walk my dog during the daylight during the summer months. And on the connecting street that is the main road of my town, that is at least lit with streetlights in the winter when it gets dark, before I'm even home from work. Since that night, I haven't had any other direct encounter with it, except one event that I'm not sure is related but elicited that same feeling of being watched and almost felt. Across from my apartment complex, on the same side as the woods and the encounter, there is a small pond surrounded by trees. A few weeks ago, my brother was over and he was outside smoking when he came in quickly and locked the door behind him. I had mentioned my encounter to him when it first happened, but he shrugged it off like most people I told, and likely didn't give it a second thought. He looked shaken and kept looking through the peephole in my door and not saying anything. He finally got out that he was outside smoking and heard loud dragging and rustling sounds coming from the wooded pond area. He said he was listening for about a minute and thought he caught a glimpse of something very tall near the tree line. He described it as the sound it would make if someone were dragging a heavy animal or body through rough brush woods, and he had a feeling of dread and heaviness, like he couldn't look away and was being honed in on by something. Normally, I'm the type of person that would go out and look for myself, maybe even going down by the pond to explore and find something, but this case shuts all of that down. There is something viscerally evil about this creature that not even I cared to explore further. I've tried telling people in my life about all of this, but as most people do with this type of stuff, none of them really put any stock into it, except my brother, now that he's had this experience. I'm of the mind that things beyond our comprehension and everyday scope absolutely do exist, and this is one I won't be messing with, or going on adventures to see again. Legends and beliefs exist for a reason, and this is one I don't want to mess with.
Coming up, a peaceful night in Red River Gorge turns to dread as an unearthly sound pierces the dark. Something is watching and waiting.
Me, my wife, and dog recently went to Red River Gorge, a state park in southeast Kentucky. We're no strangers to camping in the park, having been there at least 20 times over the past 8 years. We chose a spot I've been to 2 to 3 times before. It's worth noting that this site is outside of other dispersed camping areas and is essentially the only proper spot with car parking along a 2-mile stretch of road. There's a dilapidated barn about a mile up from where we drove in, and a cemetery about 1/3 of a mile in the opposite direction. Otherwise, it's a rarely traveled road, and we saw no one all day, just an occasional car, maybe 1 or 2 an hour. The spot is at the base of a 30-foot incline that a 4x4 could handle. Our SUV was parked horizontally at the top, blocking other vehicles from descending. From there, it's about 30 yards into the campground, with another slope leading to the river's edge and swimming hole. The day went great. We spent time near the beach, letting our dog swim, then did typical camping activities like hiking, foraging, chopping wood, throwing the hatchet, and enjoying a few beers. Once sunlight began to fade around 6:30, we started the fire and began cooking dinner. As darkness fell and the last light disappeared, we heard the usual sounds. Squirrels rustling, things falling into the leaves, which spooked my wife a bit, but we didn't think much of it. Then, at about 9 p.m., sitting around the healthy fire and listening to music, we heard heavy shuffling in the leaves, definitely something large or heavy. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the road, about halfway between us and our car. I stopped the music, and after about 10 seconds of dead silence, we heard the shuffling again. Before I could call out, we heard this strange and unnatural noise, something like a throttling, ascending pitch, mixed with a shriek. Neither of us can verbally describe it, and I can confidently say I've never heard anything like it before. It was about 20 to 25 feet away, just outside the reach of my headlamp. Our dog went insane, hair standing on end, barking incessantly into the darkness. He was on a long lead, or I'm sure he would have taken off after it. My wife and I were frozen. I was holding my hatchet and trying to catch any movement or sound to track. After about 2 to 3 minutes of that, with no further noises, I calmed the dog and we grabbed some essentials and hurried to the car. Our adrenaline was pumping as we discussed coyotes, foxes, or other animals as the possible culprits. I didn't want to mention the possibility of people, as that would have heightened the paranoia. We eventually passed out after about an hour, but I spent the rest of the night in and out of shallow sleep, feeling very uncomfortable both mentally and physically. I've always struggled to sleep anyway except fully horizontal. At around 3 a.m., right next to my head, I heard a singular knock on my window, like someone tapped the glass with one knuckle. My wife didn't wake up, and I scanned the outside of the car but didn't see or hear anything. I struggled to doze off again, and my heartbeat was rapid. When we finally got the first light around 7 a.m., we cooked breakfast, packed up our campsite, and got the hell out of Dodge. No prints or anything out of sorts with our remaining belongings either. What's strange to me is that after hearing the noise, we heard no additional heavy shuffling from the source. With our dog barking so aggressively, we should have heard whatever it was moving away. We've looked up various animal noises native to the gorge, and nothing even remotely resembles what we heard. The knock on the window was also isolated. There were no other noises or visible happenings outside the car immediately following. Lastly, I had a thought the day after we left. I remember whistling for our dog after dark, since we had some scraps to give him near the fire. Immediately I thought, shit, I shouldn't have whistled. Up until this trip, I've never been a believer of those superstitions. I just like to respect the folklore I've heard. I won't take those superstitions lightly again, and I'm sure this occurrence will affect at least my next few overnights in those woods.
Next up, miles deep in the Georgia woods, a man thought he was alone until something inhuman stood watching from the dark. I once held a hunting lease in Middle Georgia. It was an abandoned hunting camp that hadn't been used in several years. I'm not superstitious at all, but this place was legitimately spooky. It was miles down an overgrown dirt road and completely surrounded by woods. It's probably the most secluded place I've ever been. I used to hunt there by myself a lot, and there was always this weird sense that I wasn't alone out there. There was a locked gate at the front of the property, but it was not uncommon for us to find the front door of the cabin open, even when the door was locked. That was pretty creepy, but that's not what this story's about. One evening, I was hunting down in a small valley by a food plot we put in, lining a creek that bordered the property. From the minute I sat down, I had a weird feeling, like I wasn't in a safe place even though I was holding a .308 with ballistic-tipped rounds. I didn't feel like I was the top predator out there. I didn't see any deer while I was sitting in the stand, but the forest was abuzz with activity. Birds, squirrels, and other critters singing their normal evening symphony, and then, all of a sudden, silence. Everything just stopped. It felt like everything in the woods was looking right at me. It was getting dark fast anyways, and I was extremely creeped out, so I packed up my gear and started the walk back up to the cabin. About 100 yards away, I had this feeling that something was coming up behind me. I spun around and pointed my rifle back down the path towards the food plot, and that's when I saw it. There was something standing in the middle of the path. It wasn't a person, but it didn't look like a deer or anything I've seen before. There was hardly any light to make out any features, but it almost looked like some kind of bipedal deer or something. It was just standing there, staring at me. I quickly made my way back to the cabin, packed up my stuff, and got out of there. I just let the lease run out. Never went back after that. Real quick, some of you may know, but most probably don't. I launched my own coffee brand called Outlands Coffee. Not only do I run it, but I'm also the one roasting every single batch. If you love damn good coffee and want to support a fiercely independent small business while also supporting this podcast, head on over to outlandscoffee.com and give us a shot. We roast to order single origin perfection alongside a couple of bold, adventurous blends. Crafted for those who take coffee as seriously as they do their campfire stories. Here in Washington, we don't just believe in Bigfoot, we believe in a great cup of coffee too. Try it out for yourself. Use code CAMPFIRE for $5 off your first order. Now, back to the show. Coming up, We're headed deep into the Tennessee woods, very close to the land between the lakes where something watches, mimics, and lurks in the dark.
About a year ago, I moved my family and I to a home way out in the woods in Tennessee. I wanted to be brief here, but I need to get this off my chest, and after looking into this matter a little more, I have a lot more details that I think will paint a clear picture in the end. So please bear with me. The nights here can be extremely loud. Between the crickets, the tree frogs, and the cicadas, it can almost be deafening. One night, not too long after we moved in, I'd forgotten something in my car and headed outside to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog wouldn't go outside with me. My dog goes everywhere with me, as I am her whole world. But not this night. As I held the door open, she looked out, then looked up at me like, nope. So I walked out and shut the door behind me. The second thing that caught me off guard was that there was not a peep. It was dead silent. Still shrugged this off and walked down my front steps and headed down to my car. When I had gotten about 10 feet from my car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt as though something was watching me. I looked around but saw nothing. After I reached in my car for what I'd forgotten to grab earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving towards me. I took a step back and checked around me. All of a sudden, I heard one of my hedges next to me that lined the walkway to our front door rattle. At first, I thought it was a rabbit that I had spooked, as I had seen one just earlier in the day right where this was. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of a large rock, about the size of a cantaloupe, landing a few feet away from me. It hit the walkway and bounced into a shrub. I drew my gun and called out and said, "Whoever this is about to be shot." After a few seconds of nothing, I began to think that maybe this was some local teenagers messing with the new people. I holstered my sidearm, turned, and started walking back to my front door. Almost as soon as I turned towards my house, I heard this deep panting sound. It sounded like a huge dog. But what made me nope back to my front door was that it sounded like it was right behind me. I leaped up onto my porch, turned, and drew my gun again, expecting something right there. But again, there was nothing. A couple weeks later, I was on my porch at night, sitting on a bench with my wife. She got up and walked inside to get something, and as soon as she shut the door, I heard that panting sound again. I couldn't see anything, yet this sounded like it was right on top of me. The sound was coming from everywhere, and it was very loud. Again, I couldn't see anything, so I noped it back inside my house. Now at this point, I was questioning moving here, but after nothing else really happening, I let it go. A month or so later, it was a really rainy and stormy night. This is around 9 p.m., and my wife and I enjoy listening to the rain and talking about how relaxing the rain is. Me growing up in Oregon loved the rain, and for the past 10 years we lived in Vegas, where it would dump the entire year of rain in a day, then be bone dry for the rest of the year. For my wife, who grew up in Nevada, rain was such a rare thing. She loved going outside and watching the rain. So, for us, this is an enjoyable experience. Except this night in particular, things took a weird turn. As we were sitting there talking about the rain and relaxing, my wife stops me and said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "No, what did you hear?" She said, "I swear it sounded like a small child calling for help out in the woods beside our house." I said, "No, I didn't hear anything." After a few moments of us listening intently, she said, "There it is again." I said, "I didn't hear a thing, sweetie. Are you sure you're not just hearing things?" She looked at me offended that I didn't hear anything and said, "No, I'm positive. How could you not hear that? It was our son. I think he's out there and got lost." I said, "No, he's in the house sleeping on the couch." We then both looked through the blinds that were open right behind us, and we could see all of our children laying there. She said, "That's so weird. I swear it sounds like our son." I said, "Well, it isn't him. He's right there. Besides, I don't hear anything." She then stands up and says, "Wow, he's really crying out for help. I need to go look for him." Now at this point, if you knew my wife, you would know she is absolutely creeped out by the woods and wouldn't be caught dead walking into them during daylight, much less at night during a storm. I grabbed her hand and said, "I have been listening intently, and there is absolutely nobody calling out for help. You need to stay here." At this point, I'm getting worried about her. She was acting completely out of character, not to mention that at this time she is 8 months pregnant with our baby daughter. She then says, What if there is some child out there lost in the woods? I said, well, first off, I would be able to hear them too. Secondly, there are no other kids around here for miles, and the odds of them being lost 100 feet from our house that's lit up like a Christmas tree is nil. She then says, I know, but what if it's a kid? Before I could say anything else, she stands up and starts walking toward the stairs. I jumped up and grabbed her hand again and said, no, you're not. Please, let's go back in the house. I don't know what's going on, but we need to go inside. She then complies, and we both go inside. I didn't know what this was, but it freaked me out. A few months after this, just as it was getting dark outside, I heard the front door to our house open, and I got up to investigate. We have autistic 6-year-old twins, and we have the door set up so that they can't open it without us there. So to hear this sound, it could only be my wife. What was weird was the fact that she usually doesn't go outside without saying something to me. I walked out front and saw my wife walking down our private road, towards the drive on the side of our house. I asked her what she is doing, and she says she was sitting on the back patio and kept hearing a baby crying out in the woods. I said, seriously, and you just decided to walk off into the woods to investigate? She then looks out into the woods and says, see, there it is again. Again, I can't hear anything, but what I did notice is that it was completely silent out again. I told her just like before, the chances of a baby being out in the woods outside our house is slim, and that she needed to get back in the house. She said, what if someone left a baby out there? I said, well, if that were true, I would hear it too. Now at this point, I was really starting to worry about my wife's mental health. I actually asked her to see a psychiatrist, and she did. Now looking back, I feel really bad about this, knowing what I know. A key to this moment was that my wife had just given birth to a baby girl a month before. A few days after this, we are out front on the porch. It's early evening, and I had just mowed the lawn, and our 3-year-old son was riding around on his little car in front of the house. Now he knows that he is not allowed outside of a certain area that we mapped off. He loves playing outside, but with the road behind 50 feet from our front porch, we have to be careful, as a lot of boaters will fly through after drinking all day on their boats. As we are talking, we are both keeping an eye on him. A neighbor drives by and stops to say hi for a second. This interaction took approximately 8 seconds, as all they said was, how are things? We said, good, and he told us he would stop by later as his wife got something for the kids, who happens to be one of their teachers in school. And we said, okay, great. And he drove off. I looked over where our son was, and he was gone. I called out his name and ran over to the side of the house and could hear his car on our side drive. I scolded him for leaving the area, and he said something in his 3-year-old gibberish and pointed to the woods behind our house. I said, you have 5 seconds to get back up to the front of the house or else. He adamantly pointed back in the direction of the woods and kept trying to tell me something. I looked off in the direction of the woods and just assumed he saw a deer or a squirrel or something and wanted to see it up close. I walked him back up to the front of the house, and he cried the whole way there. He got really upset that I wouldn't let him go into the woods, but I just wrote this off as him being curious, and most 3-year-old boys are. Now this instance isn't isolated, as our twins have done similar things, but nothing quite as extreme as this. There have been nights where we had just laid down for the night and heard a loud bang on the side of our house on the wall behind our bed. It was so loud that I jumped up and looked out the window. Our floodlight had come on, but I could see nothing. Now the weird part about this is that our bedroom sits about 12 feet from the ground level, as we have a full-sized basement that's cinder block. I put on my slippers and grabbed one of my 12-gauge shotguns and walked outside to investigate. It was dead silent again. The floodlight that's on the side of the house had clicked off at this point, so I walked over to the end of the deck and shined my light around the yard. There was nothing. I walked around the house and shined the light around intently. As I approached the back side of my house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like someone was watching me. I shined the light up in the trees, but again, nothing. I rounded the corner, and the first thing I noticed was that my 3 dogs that were in their area weren't making a peep. Now our dogs have no filter and will bark at anyone and everyone. This includes me. So to see them all hiding with their tails between their legs, not making a peep, really had me worried. As I kept walking, all of a sudden the crickets and frogs started making sounds again. It was as if someone had clicked a switch. I walked back into the house and told my wife that I hadn't seen anything. She shrugged and said, okay, as long as our dogs were okay. Due to the circumstances that night, I decided to let the dogs in and sleep with us. This very same thing has happened on all 4 exterior walls of our house. It's random and annoying, but just like this instance, every time there is nothing going on outside. There have also been times where we were sitting in the house, and as I was watching a movie, my wife walked over to me and said, "Did you call me?" I said no, and she said she swears she heard me call her name in her ear. She said that it was definitely my voice, but she didn't understand because it sounded so close, and I was a good 20 feet away from her in my recliner. The important part to this was that she was sitting at the table doing something, and the slider to the backyard was open behind her. Now our back patio sits about 20 feet off the ground and is like a balcony as it has no stair access outside. I think the previous owner built it for barbecuing. There have been several instances where she would say she heard someone whisper in her ear, but she couldn't make out the sound. Again, I kept thinking she was going crazy, but as you will see, I think all of this is tied into this final moment where things are revealed. The last thing I want to mention before we get into what just happened is that I have a shooting range built behind my workshop on the opposite side of our property, next to the main road. It is kind of on a down slope, but it works perfectly for what I need it for. The range itself is cut straight into the woods going down about 100 yards or so. When you're at the down range, you have woods surrounding you on all sides, except back up to my shop. I have to say it has always felt creepy when I'm dealing with my targets or mowing. When you are down there, it feels like you're miles from anyone. One day around 5 in the evening, I was sighting in a new rifle scope. The sun was still up but was going to start to fade soon. So I knew this was going to be the final test. Up until this point, nothing really happened while I was making my multiple trips downrange other than this feeling of uneasiness. As I got downrange, I kept getting this feeling like someone or something was watching me. I looked around but didn't see anything. As I was placing stickers over my previous shots, I heard something big off to the side of me. It sounded like a large branch had snapped off a tree. Now, if you have been in the woods of Tennessee, you will know that a lot of branches fall off of trees randomly out of nowhere. So this is nothing new, except this time it was very loud and sounded like fresh, strong wood, if that makes any sense. I turned and looked, but again couldn't see anything. I started walking back up to my rifle, and I swear I heard someone right behind me. I turned around, but again saw nothing. As I started to walk again, I heard this deep growl. It was really deep and loud, and what's worse is that it was all around me. I turned around, facing the range, and started walking backwards. I left 10 rounds in the mag, grabbed my rifle bag, and quickly walked back up to the house. I never told my wife about this, as I didn't want her to freak out. Fast forward about a year later, my niece is staying with us as a live-in nanny to earn money over summer break from college. We were on our way back from the store and about a mile from our house, and I saw 2 eyes reflecting in the headlights coming from a wide tree on the side of the road just ahead. It had caught my attention because they were higher than a deer, but a different color and size. Just as I had said, "What is that?" and squinted, they vanished. I had made a comment that it was almost as if it had known I could see its eyes and moved. The color was kind of a golden green, but they resembled the mannerism of a large cat as they felt ominous. It's hard to explain, but I shrugged it off as we were passing the tree and saw nothing. A few moments later, we arrived at the house. As we were getting bags out of the car, my 3-year-old son came bolting out of the house, excited to see me. As I was waiting to help her carry in her bags, I heard my dog growl. I looked in the direction, and she was looking at my neighbor's property across the street. Now, what I saw has kept me up all night. Up until this point, I have always been skeptical, as I had never seen anything with my own 2 eyes. Even with what had happened to me the year prior, I still had my doubts that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Now, my street is kind of a spread-out neighborhood. Each house sits on several acres, and at the end of our road is Kentucky Lake. My neighbor's house sits adjacent to my house on about an acre lot. Directly in front of my house is a wall of woods, and directly behind my house is several thousand acres of untouched forest. As I was looking across the street to my neighbor's property, I saw a large, dark figure between the trees at first. The movement caught me off guard as it looked like something big, moving quickly on all fours. Then when it came out into clear view, it stood up and walked like a man. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. It was very tall, but what was strange about it was the distance it was covering, and the fact that when it was in front of his shed, I swear I could see through it. It was clearly walking quickly, but moving faster than any person could at a sprint. More importantly, there was no sound. It was like it was phasing in and out of reality as it moved. I said, "What the hell is that?" and realized that it was looking directly at us. It had moved at an angle away from us to minimize its time out in the open, and moving quickly as it could while still being silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized that whatever it was stalking us. I told my niece, "Get in the house now," and I grabbed my son and booked it inside. I grabbed my AR-15 with a short scope and came back outside to see my niece still grabbing stuff out of her car. As she was slowly walking, she turned towards the woods across the street from my house and suddenly bolted for the house. She ran up the steps in a panicked state. I asked her what she saw, and her face was pale as a ghost. She said, "I heard something big in the woods walking loudly on the leaves, and when I turned toward it, I heard a deep, guttural growl." I asked her why she didn't come when I told her, and she said she thought that I was talking to my son. I told her what I had seen, and she wanted to get a closer look, to see if she could see something. I told her that it was not a good idea, and she went anyway. As she was walking down the walkway, I heard the sound of dry leaves crunching in the woods across the street. I told her to stop and come take the flashlight. Now at this point, she is about 6 feet away from my wife's SUV. As she turned and started walking back to me, I caught a glimpse of something gray and hairy bolt from behind the SUV back across the street into the woods. My porch is a raised porch, and our SUV is about 6.5 feet tall, and whatever this was, it cleared about 45 feet in what looked like a single jump. It moved like lightning. Whatever it was, it wanted my niece. It jumped behind the car out of my line of sight and was waiting for her. She still doubted my warnings and grabbed the flashlight and walked back toward the car. As she entered my driveway, she stopped dead in her tracks and leaned forward as if she could see something. I asked her what she saw. She turned and ran back up on the porch with a terrified look on her face, saying, "Nope, nope, nope," over and over again. She said it was a figure hiding inside of a tree and that she saw its eyes. I asked her what they looked like, and all she could say was that they looked dull red at first, but as she got closer, they looked dead. I said, "What do you mean dead?" And she said that where the pupils were looked gray, like the way eyes look when they go blind. She said it was really dark gray, and she swears she could see through it almost like a dark cloud. She wanted to go out again and took a step down the stairs, and as she did, it revealed itself from the tree. I said, "Get inside," and I went in and locked the door. It looked like a tall, human-shaped being. It was really tall and looked ominous as hell. The next morning, we did a height comparison to the tree limb she saw it stand over, and it put its height to around 9 feet tall, and its eyes were about 6 inches apart. At this point, I don't know what this thing was. I looked to see if there had been any other sightings in Benton County, but nothing. More importantly, I swear it would phase in and out almost like a shadow person, but bigger and more obvious. It can communicate telepathically. This explains why everyone was hearing something that nobody else could hear. Secondly, it has a playback-like communication. So when I heard a dog panting, it was probably one of my dogs it had heard. My wife was actually hearing our son crying for help, as he had recently fallen and cried for help. The baby crying would be our newborn baby, who she had given birth to recently. It must have heard me call my wife's name and kept telepathically calling my wife's name with my voice. Another thing that my niece had said that night was that she felt compelled to go back outside to it. She said she felt like this thing was communicating with her somehow, and it wanted her to go back outside. The more I read about this thing, the more everything that's been happening over this past year makes sense. One thing that I find extra convincing is that down the road towards the lake, there is a property that is barbed wired off and is a wall of forest with no driveway. A lot of the property down our road is undeveloped owned land, and on one of the trees there is this large old sign that says, "Screamer lives here," with an arrow pointing back into the woods. Now I have to admit, when I first saw this sign, I laughed, thinking maybe the owner screamed at trespassers who entered his property and teenagers put up the sign to mess with him. But when I did a satellite search of our neighborhood, that entire section of road has no houses or trails or anything, and is just pure forest for as far as the eye can see. The next question is, what can we do? I don't want my wife or kids to disappear one day. And if there is more than one of these things out there, this really makes all the missing 411 stories make a whole lot of sense.
Next, on Halloween night, two friends encounter a hunched figure in a dark field.
When I was young, I didn't have many friends, only two at the time this happened, who wanted to celebrate Halloween together. One eventually bailed, leaving me and my friend Rob to hang out alone. It was freezing, and I had to bike out to our usual rendezvous point, which was about equidistant from our houses. This place was a gas station adjacent to a very large field that was occasionally used for soccer games. Once we both arrived at the gas station, we went inside, grabbed some water and sunflower seeds, and left. Due to the pandemic, we decided not to risk exposure by trick-or-treating, so we opted to walk in the field instead. It was around 9:30 at night, and it was pitch black outside. We don't live near any major cities, so our only light came from the moon and the stars. The sky was clear that night, and about 5 minutes into our walk, we became entranced by the stars, walking forward with our heads craned back, staring up. This went on for a minute or two before we thought we heard shuffling nearby. We turned to the right and saw a dark figure, faintly illuminated by the extraterrestrial light. I am a rather small person, and Rob isn't much bigger, so even the littlest things tend to put us on edge. But this was different. It looked bipedal, though hunched over, with some kind of protrusions from its head, either horns or ears. It was difficult to tell. I immediately let out a short scream and jumped toward Rob. I knew he occasionally carried a hunting knife, as he's more of an outdoorsy type. The thing then dropped down onto all fours and started yipping strangely, almost like a small dog. My friend grabbed the back of my jacket, yanked me back, and yelled for me to run. Then, he pulled out the hunting knife. The creature began pacing, still making those eerie noises. It looked like it was about to get closer before Rob threw the knife at it and bolted. He yelled an exasperated, "Shit!" as he started running. As we ran, I heard a voice repeatedly echo Rob's, also saying, "Shit!" We sprinted all the way back to the gas station, straight to where we had parked our bikes. Wordlessly, we decided it was best to just go inside the brightly lit station and wait for our nerves to settle. We haven't been able to hang out since due to the virus, but I doubt we'll ever go walking in that field at night again.
Next, what starts as a peaceful walk along the Mississippi River turns into a chilling encounter with an unseen force.
I decided to take a walk a few nights ago. I live along the Mississippi River near East River Road in Minneapolis. I've taken this route many times before, day and night, and had previously walked the same path around the same time just a few nights earlier. On my way down to the woods along the riverbank, I had a few strange experiences. As I descended the large staircase to the riverbank, I heard a couple chattering above me. I looked up the stairs multiple times and saw no one, but I swear to God I heard one of them say, "He won't make it back." 15 minutes later, things were going great. I was enjoying my time in the woods and felt at peace. Keep in mind, I have a history of camping, hunting, and hiking alone in the woods, and being in the dark has never once scared me. I've even been to therapy out of curiosity, and I'm about as neurotypical as it gets. I have a strong sense of self and think in my own internal voice, unlike those who experience thought in imagery. The sun was descending past the horizon, and I decided to continue onward. I reached a hard-to-make-out bend in the path that I could not see past. Suddenly, a woman's voice popped into my head.
Turn around.
I gleefully ignored it and continued on my merry way.
Turn around.
I spotted a log ahead that I decided would be a good stopping point and kept walking.
Turn around.
The second I reached my predetermined stopping point, an inexpressible wave of anxiety shivered through my core. I was shaking to the bone. I turned on my heel and marched back the way I came. Something deep in my essence told me that if I didn't turn around at that moment, I would be dead. By now, the sun had fully set and I was swallowed by total darkness. The feeling of being watched doesn't even begin to describe the utter dread that consumed me. I was being followed. I don't know if it was an animal, a human, a spirit, or something in between, but the presence of impending doom behind me was unmistakable. I have never known such fear. I've had panic attacks in college, suffered grief from a breakup with a woman I thought I would marry, and felt the crushing weight of debt. But I have never felt such utter hopelessness in my entire life. Then I heard the woman's voice again.
Do not look back.
I obeyed and kept marching forward, ignoring the flickering shadows in the outskirts of my vision. I rounded a bend, climbed a hill, and finally started to feel a slight release from the oppressive presence. I still felt like I was being followed, but it was from farther away, distant enough that I didn't think it could harm me. I let my guard down just a little. That was my first mistake. In that brief moment of relaxation, I heard another voice, one that was not my own, a deep, raspy voice that wanted nothing more than to announce its presence. Hey. Every muscle in my back clenched as I fought the overwhelming urge to run. My skin felt like it was shredding. Shivers doesn't even begin to describe the fight-or-flight response my body was experiencing. I wanted to sprint, but something deep inside warned me, if I ran, I would trigger a predator's instinct, and the hunt would begin. 10 agonizing minutes passed, and with every step I took, I heard another echo behind me, one that was not my own. Then at last I saw it, the massive staircase that had led me down to the riverbank. In that moment, I talked myself into insanity. I did what any rational human would do. I decided to appreciate the beauty of the city before me and snap a quick picture. Apparently, I have zero survival instincts. For the first time since the initial encounter, I stopped moving. I felt safe enough with my escape route in sight, but the moment my strides halted at the perfect angle, I heard it. Not one, not two. 3 steps echoed off the asphalt behind me. I power-walked harder than I have ever power-walked before. Just before I reached the first step of the staircase, every hair on my neck stood at attention. It felt like something was breathing down my neck. I jumped up the first flight of stairs. By the time I scaled the 3rd flight, the suffocating presence began to fade. A wave of indescribable warmth filled my chest. All I could muster in my head was, "Thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God." As I neared the top, about to round the last bend before re-entering the city lights, I risked a peek back into the thick darkness below. Nothing, just an empty trail. I have never, ever experienced this kind of primal fear in my life.
For our final story of the evening, we're headed to a secluded cabin where something is watching us from the trees. I'll be the first to admit that all of this could have just been in my head. The mind is a freaky thing and can play some pretty trippy tricks on you. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad always told me that in life, you shouldn't be afraid of ghosts. Fear the living because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide and left me an inheritance. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin in Oregon near Mount Bachelor. Since my mom could no longer afford the payments and renting it out wasn't covering the costs, the cabin was put up for sale. It was set to go on the market in less than a month, and all the paperwork was being finalized with the realtor and lawyer. For that month, the cabin was vacant, no renters, no visitors. I saw this as a chance to get away and clear my head after everything that had happened. I quit my job, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog, and took my dad's car, which he had willed to me, up to the cabin. This was our family cabin, which my parents rented out when we weren't using it. I had the keys and the alarm code, so I didn't feel the need to stop by the rental management company to inform them of my stay. That doesn't really matter for the story, but I figured I'd mention it anyway. The first 2 days at the cabin were normal, nothing unusual at all. I spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and my evenings drinking, listening to music, and smoking out on the balcony. I had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much a shut-in, aside from the occasional trip to the slopes. With my dog for company and DVDs and PlayStation for entertainment, I was content. I finally started to relax after all the drama that had led me there. The cabin itself was 2 stories. The bottom floor had the living room, a side guest bedroom, and a small kitchen. The upstairs had 2 more bedrooms, including the master bedroom, which had a walkout balcony. I spent almost all my time in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never went into the other rooms. I always kept those doors shut. Open doors to dark rooms have always creeped me out. On the 3rd day, I was going through my usual routine, playing with my dog, watching DVDs, and gaming. The snowfall was heavy that day, so I decided to stay in rather than drive down the hill to the main road. That's when things started getting weird. There were only 2 other cabins near ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins were about a mile away. Surrounding us was mostly forest and very tall pine trees. This will be important later. Both of the nearby cabins were empty. I knew no one was staying there because I had seen no signs of activity over the past couple of days. Around midday, while I was outside with my dog, I noticed footprints in the snow around our cabin. It was still snowing, so the prints looked fresh, like someone had been there in the last 20 to 30 minutes. I thought maybe someone was staying in one of the nearby cabins, and I just hadn't noticed. Maybe they were shut-ins like me. The prints led away from my cabin and disappeared into the denser part of the trees. I brushed it off and went back inside. That night, I got into bed, and my dog, Midnight, was lying beside me when his ears suddenly perked up. A second later, he jumped off the bed and ran downstairs to the living room. I stayed silent, listening. I could hear him moving back and forth downstairs, pacing. After about 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started doing his little dance, his sign that he needed to go outside. Shit, fine. I couldn't say no to him. We went downstairs and out to the driveway, but as soon as we got outside, he didn't want to pee. Instead, he started pulling on his leash, trying to drag me toward the trees, the same spot where the footprints had been earlier. He also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up toward the roof. I wasn't about to go wandering into the woods at night, so I pulled him back inside and we went upstairs. About half an hour later, I was lying in bed when I heard something. It sounded like hooves walking across the roof. There were about 6 steps, spaced apart like a man's stride. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a pine cone had fallen from a tree. Maybe a forest animal was up there. Midnight heard it too. He ran to the balcony screen door and stood there, waiting for me to let him out. All right, you know what? I considered myself a tough guy at the time, fairly well built, strong enough to handle myself. So, I grabbed my coat, shoes, cigarettes, and flashlight and stepped out onto the balcony. Fuck it, right? I lit a cigarette and scanned the roof with my flashlight. Nothing. The snow on the roof was undisturbed. Weird. Had I imagined it? Maybe. But then, why did Midnight react too? Maybe he was just feeding off my paranoia. I started to relax. I leaned against the railing, staring at the stars, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. And that's when I saw it. In a tree, taller than our cabin, about 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouching between 2 branches. He was squatted on one branch, arms extended above his head, holding on to the branch above. Fuck me. What the fuck is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing. I stood there, frozen. Midnight stood up behind me, pacing, lightly barking. The thing still didn't move. I debated whether to shine my flashlight on it, but something in my gut told me not to. Instead, I walked backward into the room, pulling Midnight with me. Once inside, I locked the door and finally aimed my flashlight at the tree. Nothing. I shut the curtains, got back into bed, and tried to sleep. Later that night, I heard it. A light tapping at the screen door, like fingers tapping on the glass. It was rhythmic, consistent, and it didn't stop. It went on for nearly an hour. Midnight just stared at the door, but wouldn't go near it anymore. The strangest part? I had this overwhelming feeling, like someone was inviting me to open the door. But in the back of my mind, I kept hearing my dad's voice, telling me to stay in bed. So I listened. Eventually, I passed out. When I woke up, everything was normal. The rest of the week, nothing else happened. No footprints, no noises, and no tapping, thankfully. I totally admit, it could have all been in my head. A lot was going on at the time, and I was pretty messed up from all the drama. But still, I don't think I'll ever forget that night. That's all for tonight, dear listeners, unless you are a Patreon cult member, that is, where I've got a few more tales to keep you at the edge of your seat. And please remember, if you want to support this podcast and love a damn good cup of coffee, head on over to outlandscoffee.com and use code CAMPFIRE for $5 off your first order and give us a try. If you want to become a Patreon cult member to get extended episodes and other full Patreon-only episodes, you can sign up at patreon.com/campfirecultpod for only $5 a month. Until next time, I'll be leaving you in the dark where whispers linger and shadows dance. Stay wary, sleep well, and beware the whispers in the night. If you have a story to tell, please reach out via email at contact@campfirecultpod.com or leave me a voicemail message at 720-297-8608. You can follow us anywhere on social media at campfirecultpod and online at campfirecultpod.com. And finally, if you don't mind, please rate and review wherever possible.